welcome back to Dark Matter Podcast. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Avalon.
And today we're going to be covering a really tragic event that caught my attention as soon as I heard about it. And I feel like this event was just the perfect storm of several things going wrong, as well as, a combination of human error. And that is the case of the 2002 collision that occurred mid-air between two planes and how the situation led to murder. And before we start, we just want to mention that a lot of the names and places that are mentioned in the story are in Russian and German. So we apologize in advance. If we mispronounce anything, we are going to try our best, but just ahead of time.
I'm going to mispronounce things. Yeah. I'm going to try my best, though.
Yeah.
All right, so first we wanted to get into some background on the case because there's just a lot to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on July 1st of 2002, a group of about 50 Russian school children from the city of Ufa were waiting to board a plane. Most of them were children from high-ranking officials in the region of Bashkortostan.
Yes.
They were on a school trip to a youth festival in the Costa Dorada area of Spain, which had been organized by the local UNESCO committee. These children were the top students of their school, which is why they had been invited to the festival. And it was reported that there were 8 children who were under the age of 12, and 44 of the students were between 12 and 16. So they were all younger than 16. They're pretty young kids.
Yeah, they're very young.
Yeah. And the group had originally been scheduled to leave on Saturday, but they had accidentally gone to the wrong airport, so they missed their flight. However, they quickly chartered a flight with Bashkirian Airlines and were waiting to depart from Domodedovo in Moscow, which we kind of talked about that earlier. Like, I wish I could do that when I miss a flight.
I know, just
rent
charter
a plane. Yeah. The
Oh.
plane, which was a Tupolev 145, was piloted by 52-year-old Captain Alexander Gross and 40-year-old First Officer Oleg Grigoriev. They were also joined by another co-pilot who was 41-year-old Murat Itkalov, and he would not be operating the flight. And there's also a 50-year-old flight navigator named Sergei Karlov and 37-year-old flight engineer Oleg Valiyev.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
a lot of names.
In total, this is a little confusing. So in total, there were 5 officers in the cockpit. So just to make that clear, but only 2 of them were really, the 2 of them were the captains. There was an engineer, but there was another co-pilot that wasn't really serving any function in this flight. He was kind of just there.
Yeah, that's, now looking back, that's kind of strange that there was 5 of them and this ended up happening. So, I mean, I guess they couldn't have prevented it, but like.
Right. Well, I think the captain in charge of this flight, he's had a lot of hours and a lot of experience as well, but apparently this particular route is like a challenge, so he was actually being overseen by the first officer who had experience with this. So maybe perhaps that's why there were so many of them there, but either way, there were a total of 5 people in the cockpit at the time.
Right. Approximately 6:48 p.m., the Bashkirian Airlines flight 2937 took off from Moscow Domodedovo Airport, carrying 60 passengers and 9 crew, so a total of 69 people.
Right. And at approximately 9:35 p.m. that night, residents of Uberlingen, Germany, a town near the German-Swiss border, heard a loud explosion as well as a roaring and rumbling. People immediately ran to their windows to see what had happened, and one of the witnesses, a school caretaker named Klaus Dieter Schindler, said, quote, "I saw a ball of fire in the sky. Behind the forest, it looked like a firework display was going off, but in the glow of the fire, I saw wreckage falling out of the sky. It looked like black rain." Bashkirian Flight 2937, carrying the Russian schoolchildren, had collided mid-air with a Boeing 757 cargo jet, DHL Flight 611. And there were only 2 people aboard the Boeing 757, which was the pilot in charge, 47-year-old British captain Paul Phillips, as well as 34-year-old Canadian First Officer Brian Campione. And both pilots on DHL Flight 611 had flown together as a crew and had flown that particular route as well several times the entire month of June, so they were pretty used to that route already. And even though they were within the borders of Germany, the airspace was controlled by a private Swiss company called Skyguide, which was stationed in Zurich, Switzerland. After the accident was reported, there was an official investigation into the crash by the German Federal Bureau of Aircraft Accident Investigation.
Right. So next we're going to get into some details what the hell happened, because I remember when I heard about this, I was like, what?
Yeah, because I feel like it's very rare that obviously you hear about two planes crashing into the sky. Either if there is like a plane crash, it's usually during landing or takeoff. So for this to happen midair is, very
Very
strange.
strange, yeah. The DHL Flight 611 had departed from Bahrain Airport at 1:30 p.m. with a stopover in Bergamo, Italy to refuel and reload cargo before taking off again at 21:06, which is 9:06 p.m. So now we're going to switch to military time just because that's what it was like provided in. So it'll be hours, minutes, seconds. So at 21:34:30, they're on board traffic alert and collision avoidance system, which we're going to call TCAS because we don't have that much time to pronounce it, to say that every time. Issued a traffic advisory. They said traffic, traffic. The cockpit voice recorder recorded clicking noises, and 14 seconds later, TCAS issued a resolution advisory to descend. They said descend, descend. And then 2 seconds later, the autopilot is shut off, and the flight data recorder and TCAS recorded that the plane was reaching a descent of 15,000 feet per minute. And at 21:35:05, cockpit voice recorder caught the co-pilot saying traffic right there, to which the pilot in charge confirmed yes. So then at 21:35:10, which is 14 seconds after the resolution advisory to descend, TCAS issued an order to increase descent. So keep going down. Following the resolution advisory, they increased the rate of descent to about 2,600 feet per minute 10 seconds later. And at 21:35:19, the crew reported TCAS descent to Area Control Center Zurich. Co-pilot is heard telling the pilot to descend. And at 21:35:26, they said descend hard, which is about 4 seconds later. And then 2 seconds prior to the collision, the control column was pushed fully forward, indicating one last desperate attempt to avoid collision.
Right. So those were the details of the first aircraft that was involved in the crash, and that was the cargo plane, the Boeing 757. So on the other flight, which was carrying the Russian school children, Bashkirian flight 2937, from about 21 hours and 33 minutes to 21 hours 34 minutes and 41 seconds, the cockpit voice recorder recorded crew discussions about an airplane approaching from the left, which was displayed on the vertical speed indicator, which was part of their TCAS. This suggests the crew were trying to figure out what the other plane's location was, as well as their flight level. At 21:34:42, their TCAS generated a traffic advisory saying traffic, traffic. 7 seconds later, Area Control Center Zurich instructed the crew to expedite descent to 35,000 feet, saying, quote, descend flight level 350, expedite, I have crossing traffic, end quote. The pilot in command is then heard telling them to increase descent, and the control column was pushed forward. However, the descent command was not verbally acknowledged by the crew. At the same time, their TCAS gave a resolution advisory to climb. 3 seconds later, their CVR recorded the co-pilot saying that the TCAS said to climb, to which the pilot in charge responded, he, meaning the air traffic controller, is guiding us down. Co-pilot asked, descend? So in this moment, they are receiving two conflicting orders. So their air traffic controller is asking them to descend. However, their TCAS is telling them to climb. So at this point, I think they're a little bit confused and trying to figure out which is the right course of action. So at 21:35:02, the pilot flying pulls the control column, causing a decrease in the rate of descent. Another discussion between the crew is interrupted at 21:35:03 by the air traffic controller, once again telling the crew, quote, descend level 350, expedite descend, end quote. The instruction is immediately acknowledged by the pilot not flying, and the controller updates the crew about flight traffic, saying, quote, we have traffic at your 2 o'clock position now at 360, end quote. The pilot in charge then asks, where is it? To which the co-pilot responds, here on the left side. At this time, the rate of descent was approximately 1,500 feet per minute. While the controller was giving his last instruction, the flight navigator is heard saying, it's going to pass beneath us. At 21:35:05, the pilot flying pushed down the control column again, and the rate of descent was increased to 2,000 feet per minute. At 21:35:24, the TCAS issues another resolution advisory, increase climb. The pilot then calls out, it says climb. 5 seconds before the collision, the control column was pulled back. During the last second prior to collision, the control column was called back abruptly and thrust levers were pushed fully forward. At 21:35:32, the Tupolev 145 collided with a Boeing 757 at a flight level of 34,890 feet. Both aircraft were destroyed, with the Boeing 757 losing its tail in the collision and the rest being destroyed by impact forces. The Tupolev 145 had broken up midair into several pieces. There was a total of 71 fatalities, with 69 passengers and crew on the Tupolev 145 and the two pilots on the Boeing 757.
Okay, so really quick, just to clarify, so the TCAS and the air traffic controller were giving different.
Yes, they were giving conflicting reports.
So what my question that came up with this is, what is the TCAS versus the air? You know what I mean? Why?
I think the TCAS is meant to be like a sort of an autopilot, like just in case.
Is it like a system?
Yeah, like a
that's
warning
what I was
system.
thinking, but I was confused. Okay, that makes sense, because it's basically like their navigation was telling them one thing, and that makes sense that like that sucked, like the navigation was right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so the navigation had told them to descend. So yes, however, they had disregarded that, which led to the confusion.
Yeah, because of course you would take the person's word for it first, because it's like a human. Like there's
and
always,
besides,
like,
he was the
error.
one controlling the entire
exactly
the sky area.
Oh, that's so sad. So next,
airspace,
right?
Sky.
Yeah, sky area. Okay, so next we're gonna get into the aftermath of the collision. So I mentioned before that the airspace that both aircrafts were flying in was controlled by a Swiss company called SkyGuide. And during the investigation into the crash, it was revealed that the air traffic controller had contacted Flight 2937 to descend into flight level 350 to avoid Flight 611, so to avoid crashing. But seconds later, Flight 2937's TCAS system told them to climb, while Flight 611's TCAS instructed them to descend. So if both aircraft had followed, the crash wouldn't have occurred. So if they had just both listened to like their
TCAS,
navigation or their like computers, they would have basically gone like that, and they wouldn't have hit each other. However, Flight 611 followed their TCAS's instructions, but the air traffic controller was not informed, and we'll get into why he was not informed. So further investigation into the SkyGuide revealed that there was only one air traffic controller in the room at the time, and his name was Peter Nielsen. And he was manning two different stations, which is already not good, because this is a really intense job. Like,
right, this is one of those jobs that you can't really multitasking. This is obviously very important, and as we've seen, one slip up can cause a catastrophe.
Exactly. Like, this is such an important. There's a reason. Like, if I don't know if you looked into this, air traffic controllers make a shitload of money.
They do, yeah, because obviously their job is very important.
You have
guiding
a lot of people's lives in your hands. Like, it's just a really tragic situation.
It really was.
So the Boeing 757 and the Tupolev 145 were both on the same radio frequency, and they could listen to the radio communication between each other and the air traffic controller. However, the crew on the Tupolev hadn't heard anything from the Boeing 757 because there hadn't been any radio communication between them and Air Control Center Zurich since their first contact at 21:30:11. And the two aircrafts were the only planes on this frequency at the time before the crash. However, Peter Nielsen also had to handle the delayed approach of an Airbus A320, which was on a different frequency, and this required him to move to the other station right next to his. So he had that one to deal with, like he had to guide them, the Airbus, to landing.
Yes, which was on a different frequency, and then he had to deal with the two planes that was on his same frequency.
Right. And the flight crews on different frequencies could not hear each other, which sometimes resulted in simultaneous transmission. This meant that the air traffic controller didn't respond to these transmissions, or did so only after the call was repeated, which is why I think he didn't know about Flight 611 following their TCAS. So basically what I'm understanding from this is that, like, if they call in at the same time, he doesn't get a call at all. And so if you don't repeat yourself, he didn't hear what they said.
Exactly.
Which seems like a huge flaw in the system.
Yes. So apparently there was like this was part of it too, was the fact that he had two different stations, which he should not have been doing. Apparently, according to SkyGuide, it was against company policy for a single controller to be alone in the room. However, apparently this was pretty lax, and management had known about this. So there was an air traffic controller with him in the same room previously. However, he had apparently gone off into the next room to nap. So, obviously, like we mentioned, this is not the type of job that, you have to keep your focus on this single thing. So this obviously
It was a
which is
perfect
why.
storm. It
Yeah,
really
it
was.
really
Like, just
was.
like if that guy wasn't taking a nap or if they hadn't
Yes.
called at the same time, like if there was better communication, like there's literally so many like so many small things that contributed to this that like if any of these things or even if they didn't end up on the chartered but or the chartered
Yes,
plane,
if he
like
had taken the original
yeah, like
plane,
if
yeah.
anything had happened differently, probably nobody would have died. It's just so upsetting.
Yeah, and I think this is why this case caught my attention is just the fact that it was so tragic and the fact that it wasn't even any one person's fault. It was just a mix of
It's
several
yeah.
factors
And
that
then
unfortunately led to this.
it was kids that died. A lot of
Yes, a
kids. Like
lot
it
of
just
children, yeah. And
sucked.
I think that's the part that really stuck with me too is the fact that yes, we deal with true crime cases, but the fact that these were all children and the fact that there were so many makes it very hard to accept, which it kind of reminds me of that episode we did on the Seawall Ferry
That's exactly what I
tragedy.
was gonna
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
They're very similar in the fact that, you know, there were very obviously promising children on aboard this plane and they unfortunately didn't survive.
Yeah, that one was really upsetting too because the government really didn't do anything. But it's
Yeah.
kind of similar where like there's so many things that happened that if one of them didn't, this could have been prevented. But it's what happened.
Yeah. So, because of this, as well as delayed radar data, like we mentioned, Peter Nilsson did not realize the problem between the Boeing and the Tupolev until less than a minute before the collision, which is when he contacted Flight 2937. And since he wasn't aware of any TCAS instructions and hadn't received the Boeing's transmission that they were obeying their TCAS and descending, he instructed the Tupolev to descend as well, which meant both aircraft were now descending at the same level. So he hadn't received the Boeing's transmission, and he instructed the Tupolev to descend, which meant both aircraft were now descending, which led to the collision. And about 140 relatives of the Russian schoolchildren who had died in the crash flew to Lake Constance in southern Germany to gather where the wreckage of the Tupolev had lain and mourn them. They also brought, unfortunately, this is very tragic, as they also brought medical and dental records, which they hoped would help identify the bodies which had been recovered from the wreckage, which span over a 20-mile radius. So, unfortunately, of course, the collision did happen midair, and there was a lot of debris, and it wasn't a small crash. So they did have quite a lot of area to search for both the wreckage and for recovering any bodies.
That's so sad. And imagine like
It
if it
really
was
is.
like the middle of nowhere, I'm assuming that's where they ended up like landing.
Yeah, it was a
I
very
hate to say
small
this, but
town in
like
Germany.
yeah, like
Yeah.
animals could have got to them. You know what I mean? Over 20 miles. Like I don't know if
Yeah.
they
I
or
think the
they didn't
recovering.
recover all of them, but like
Yeah.
oh god, like don't even want to imagine what the people had to see, their loved ones.
Yeah. Once all the bodies had been recovered and identified, their caskets were flown back to Russia, and a crowd of about 1,000 people gathered in the town of Ufa for their burial. And of course, this was a huge national tragedy for Russia. Like we mentioned, there were a bunch of children on that flight, and most of them were very promising. Like we mentioned, they had been invited to the UNESCO festival, which, if you were not aware, it's like a United Nations program for maths and sciences. So like we mentioned, these children were very talented, very smart, and promising.
And so young too.
Yeah,
Like
so
they had
very
so
young.
much potential. Like if they're going to that when they were like 8 years old, some of them,
Yes,
like
yeah.
obviously they had so much potential for, like in the future. And it's just and even if they didn't have the potential, it's
Yeah, it was
just
just
so
sad
sad.
in
It's
general.
horrible.
Yes. And it was, of course, this was reported on a lot, and even President Vladimir Putin offered his condolences to,
Damn. If
the.
Putin says something,
Yeah,
you
you
know
know
it's
it's bad.
bad. Yeah. God.
Yeah, so, and unfortunately, the tragedy doesn't stop there. Vitaly Kolayev, a 48-year-old Russian man, had actually lost his wife and two kids in the crash as well. He had actually been working as an architect in Spain at the time, and his family had actually been on their way to visit him. And what's even more tragic is that he was waiting for them at the airport apparently, and when he heard about the crash he actually had traveled to Germany, I guess, to help with the search efforts, and I think that he was actually the one to find his daughter's body. So yes, as you can imagine, this obviously broke him and devastated him. Like no parent should ever have to go through that. So I mean, I can just imagine losing your entire family in one fell swoop. It must be incredibly hard. And so, devastated by their deaths about 2 years after the crash, he actually hired a private investigator. He actually tracked down the air traffic controller, Peter Nielsen, at his home near Zurich, and he stabbed him to death in front of his wife and three kids, unfortunately. So, this tragedy just led to yet another tragedy. I feel like there was just nothing good to come of this, obviously. and he was arrested shortly after, and in 2005 he was sentenced to prison. However, in November 2007, he apparently appealed his sentence, and he was released after appealing that his mental state had not been considered enough during his sentencing. So basically, he argued that he was just so mad with grief at the time that he couldn't be held responsible for his actions, and apparently that actually worked because once he was released and once he returned home, he actually returned to enthusiastic crowds who regarded him as a hero. And you
It's like
mentioned that that was such a Russian thing to do, to go out and get revenge, and it kind of is,
to
but
just go kill him, like just find him and like literally that's like
yeah.
Liam Neeson style, like I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna kill you. And he did.
Yeah, and but it was just crazy. Obviously, I know there were a lot of controversy regarding this, and I understand because on one hand, I fully understand his pain. I understand that losing his entire family must have been devastating. And
Yeah.
however, I don't I wouldn't consider the air traffic controller fully culpable in this situation.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, absolutely he was the one in charge and he did mess up. However, I think there were other accentuating circumstances that led to this. Like the fact that he had to work two workstations and he had to guide that delayed Airbus to a safe landing definitely meant that his attention was taken from the other two planes, as well as the delayed radar. He had no control over that as well.
And like I
So
don't think he told the guy to go take a nap. You
no,
know what I
yeah.
mean? Like I
So
really don't think it was his fault. I don't think it's nice that people were like cheering him on for killing him. Like that's not okay.
yeah,
But I do understand where they're all coming from, where the
yeah.
where the
It
man who
was a
killed him
difficult
was coming
situation.
from, and the
Yes.
people who are like applauding him and everything were very excited, like that he got out. Like I understand their pain, but like
Mhm.
I think it's just a very human thing to want to have a
Someone to
or
blame.
a
Yes.
devil, you know, to
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to have somebody just to put it all on. Like he was just the bad guy. But the reality of life is that things are much more nuanced than that. It's usually
Yeah.
not black and white. And especially in this case, like even when you were first telling me about it, I wanted to paint this picture as like the guy as like negligent and just like what a bum and just an asshole. And it's like I don't really think that's who he was. Like I think he was doing his job to the best that he could, and
I
it was
agree.
honestly so many different things that made this happen that were many of them were just completely out of his hands, that it's like I found myself even wanting him to be bad, him wanting to make him this like
Right, because you wanted someone to
to
blame because it
blame. Yeah.
was such a tragic
Because yeah,
accident.
when
Yeah.
something so horrible happens, it's like we as humans, I feel like it's hard for us to believe that just
Yeah.
happened because of pure chance. Because then that could
Exactly.
happen to us, you know, or
And
somebody
it's
we love.
terrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want to think that. So we want to have someone to blame. But unfortunately, and it's easy for us to say this because our families and kids and everything were not killed, obviously.
Right.
But like objectively, like it wasn't really his fault. And it's really sad that he died.
Especially in front of his own children. I guess the man had claimed that he went to his home not intending to kill him. He said that he had just brought his children's pictures. He like wanted to show them, but unfortunately he like lost it and he killed them. But the thing is, you also scarred his children. You also took a
Yeah.
man away from his children, and you did that in front of them. They're gonna
The
have to live
kids
with
didn't
that.
do anything.
Yeah, exactly. They're gonna have